a new AAA baseball stadium, a new team. But will there be enough parking? The city of Wichita says yes. And why a bill to make it easier to prevent the abusive, violent murder of young children hasn't made its way through the State House just yet. Plus, $90 million more a year for your child's education. Is it enough? We get a first look at the arguments for and against. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. I'm Pilar Pedraza, and this is Kansas Week. We're 3 weeks away from a Supreme Court hearing on whether the state has added enough extra money to your child's school budget. Some say it did, some say it didn't. In 3 weeks, the schools suing the state for more funding will go back before the Kansas Supreme Court to argue the $90 million a year increase lawmakers approved doesn't adequately cover inflation. They say the amount should increase every year of the bill so that by the 2022-23 school year, it equals $363 million. Attorney General Derek Schmidt argues they're asking for a heckler's veto after everyone else involved, the governor, lawmakers, and the State Board of Education, agreed $90 million a year was sufficient. In his filings, the Attorney General wrote, "This court should give great weight to the considered decisions of both the education officials and the people's representatives. That is particularly true here, given the widespread bipartisan consensus." Meanwhile, the court has said it's too late for the governor and the State Board of Education to enter supporting arguments or friend of the court statements in this case. And I'm joined on the desk today by Phil Journey, District Court Judge and former state senator, Republican, and Democrat Tom Sawyer, House Minority Leader, and Diane Leffler from the Wichita Eagle. Thank you all so much for joining me.
Good to be here.
So this is a story I think we've all discussed ad nauseum on this show and in the halls of justice, in the halls of the State House. Are we at the point of seeing an end to this at all?
No. No.
Okay, Phil, I'll start with you.
No. I'm looking at quotes from Mr. Gannon, who was the namesake for the first one. I was in the legislature from 2003 to 2008. I went through the 2005 special session. And it's pretty apparent to me that while the Supreme Court said if you just count for inflation on the adequacy issue, you'll be good. Mm-hmm. But the Schools for Fair Funding, led by the Wichita School District, has said they flipped right after Ms. Kelly became governor and said, nope, it's not going to be enough. They don't do the simple math for inflation. And really, it's another $325 million. Well, we just got the revenue estimating consensus, and there isn't going to be the money there for that because they're saying over the next 2 years it's going to expand like state revenues like $15 million a year, which is literally a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking what, a $7-8 billion budget?
Right. So, what is going to happen? I can't tell you that. I'm not that clairvoyant, but I can say that if the bipartisan group that was made up of Democrats and Republicans elected on the principle of expanding education funding, if what they have said is not enough, then they have to go back to the drawing board. And that, of course, the argument isn't until May 9th. The wrap-up session starts May 1st. And if they do what Schools for Fair Funding says is give the legislature another year, they're going to be staring at a special session just before the primaries in 2020. So,
I can see Tom over here cringing.
That's really
not what lawmakers want.
That is putting a gun to their head. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So will they find enough Republicans to say this far and no farther? And that was the question I asked the majority leader, Mr. Hawkins, today at Pachyderm Club meeting. And he says he doesn't know. He thinks maybe. So we'll see.
Tom?
Well, I think there's a good chance the court will accept this. I mean, you can never guess for sure, but I think the court made it clear we had to adjust for inflation. And the State Board of Education looked at it and said, adding this $90 million, adjust for inflation. The governor's office looked at it, said, adding $90 million, adjust for inflation. Large bipartisan majorities of the House and Senate agreed. So I think when you have that many people agreeing that this is the adjustment for inflation, there's a good chance the court will accept it. Obviously, the Schools for Funding are saying no. They're saying they want a different calculation. But in the end, I think that there's a good chance they'll take it. Now, if they don't, Phil's right. It will be a rough year next year because we don't have money there. So you're talking again about trying to find more money for schools by cutting other programs, and that's not easy. So I think we put, if you look at what we've put into schools the last 3 years, we put in almost $300 million 2 years ago. We put in $525 million last year, and these are spread over multiple years, but it's new money. And then $90 million this year. You're talking about $900 million over the period. I think, to me, that should satisfy the court case, and I think $90 million will adjust for inflation, considering, and several people have looked at it, have come to the same conclusion.
And I know, Diane, you and I kind of have the journalistic pessimistic hat on that says this is nowhere near over. But just because I think the entire time I've been in Kansas, I've been covering this one way or another.
Oh yeah, I mean, is it ever going to end? I mean,
Yeah.
that's and I mean, I have to tell you, I don't think it will.
No.
I mean, I think that probably this will, the scenario I would see is that the court will accept this, and then somebody will come back and they'll,
File a new lawsuit.
there'll be something that happens,
Well,
that,
One thing that's different about the bill we passed this time than in the past, that there is actually, after all the new money's put in, then each year thereafter there's a CPI adjustment, so that it goes up, school funding goes up automatically each year with CPI. So I think as long as future legislatures, now they can always change that, because it's just a bill, not in the Constitution. But as long as they stick to that, I think that avoids future court cases. I think we'll have it done. But the problem is, a recession could come along, a future legislature can say, oh, we can't do the CPI adjustment this year.
Well,
Then all of a
exactly.
sudden we're back
Yeah.
to the court.
I was
Exactly.
gonna say,
That's
I
what
think the
happened
biggest issue
last
there
time.
Right,
is
it was.
the predicted
so.
recession, which a lot of folks are saying end of 2020. We
The
can expect a
ag
recession.
sector in the Kansas economy and the oil sector are just suffering horribly right now. And the reality is that the conservatives, they want to restrain the spending because they want to they think that's the only way they can get school boards to be more efficient, is to make them make the hard decisions they have to make with their spending money. And they want the schools to be held accountable because there has not been a significant improvement in achievement scores or in SAT scores in the last decade, even though all this extra money has gone into the system. And so the question becomes, where does this money go? Does it go into the classroom? And I mean, and that's the mantra.
But the conservatives had their way, though, all those years under Brownback. There wasn't new money being put into schools for several years in a row.
Well, 2008 was a horrible recession.
Well, I know, but I'm just saying, you were talking about they wanted that. Well, for 5 years they got that. Schools had to hold back for 5 years. They had to cut back. They had, so we've gone through that. The other interesting thing is what this dichotomy, more money in the classroom, all these things that they keep wanting to add to the bill. When we're on the House floor debating bills, they want to add all these other things, cost school districts money outside the classroom. They keep wanting school districts to spend money on things that aren't in the classroom. So to me, it's one of those things that's, it doesn't make sense. If you really want more money in the classroom, quit putting these other burdens on the school districts.
You can't control your individual members' amendments either, can you? No. So,
I don't know. I
you
seem to
can't say
remember-
one guy's amendment is like everybody's because they didn't vote for it. So,
Well, and I think it's worth noting here that studies have shown that the percentage of money that goes into the classroom is practically irrelevant to the achievement of the students. I just wanted to throw that out there because we always hear, there's not enough going into the classroom. Well, the schools are doing a lot of stuff, and I mean,
a lot of stuff that they weren't doing 50 years ago, 100 years ago. I mean, busing and hot lunches and free breakfasts, all of which studies show, technology, all of which studies show do contribute to student success.
And mental health and social workers. I mean, there is a whole lot more going to schools than we used to have.
Schools are more than just the 3 R's these days.
they are tasked with far more things than they ever have been in the past, and that's because other areas in the social safety net have been withered on the vine.
No.
And so schools have had to pick up the slack, and they're really not designed to do that, so it doesn't work really
Which
well
is
sometimes.
it's been a jury-rigged system for quite some time.
That's a fair way to put it. That's really a nice way to put it. But,
Well, we'll leave that one there for the moment and move on. The governor this week signed into law a bill that could change the way you vote, or at least where you can vote. I explain how it works in this story I filed with Cake News.
I think, anything that brings us into the modern age is great.
Voters in Sedgwick County we spoke with Tuesday like the idea of being able to vote at any polling site in the county instead of having to go to one assigned location.
I think it'd be fantastic. I think you'd have better voter turnout for sure. Makes it convenient for everybody. You don't know where you're going to be. Like I am almost 30 minutes from here Is where my voting location is, but I'm working downtown, so it'll be a huge plus.
That's one of the two things Sedgwick County Elections Commissioner Tabitha Lehman was thinking about when she wrote the law.
This is the same concept we've been doing for more than 10 years during early voting, where we have that electronic check-in where you come in, you check in to vote, and it's going to mark you across the county as voted so that you then can't go to another site and vote again.
She says it will also eliminate the need for provisional ballots that have to be counted by hand and may not ever be fully counted.
Obviously, we have 1,100 and 1,600 people in the last two federal elections who went to the polling place that was either most convenient for them or they didn't realize their polling place changed. Whatever that reasoning was, we want to be able to serve them.
The county is even developing an app that will help you find the nearest polling sites and which ones are busiest.
We're nowhere near the point of people being able to vote from their cell phone, nowhere near secure, there's no way. Yeah. So if we can take small incremental steps and make improvements that make it easier while still protecting the integrity of the election, then we want to make sure we do that.
And hopefully attracting more younger voters at the same time.
Oh, especially the younger millennials, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to me, those are the voters we got to get out, and they've got to buy in, and so this would be a way to do that.
And now, one thing that really stuck out to me as I was looking at this bill when I first heard about it and beyond was it really hit one of the arguments that was made in the kerfuffle over, yes, I love words, okay, in the kerfuffle over the Dodge City voting situation there when they moved their one polling site outside of town. One of the arguments that was made in federal court was just open the old location and the new location and people can vote wherever they show up. And it was McCaskey, Brian McCaskey, head of elections in Kansas, said at the time, Kansas law doesn't allow that. Now it does, but not every state, not every county can do it. And as you've covered elections, Zion, do you think this really will increase voter participation?
Yes, I do. It's so confusing for people. Your polling place changes, it's one day it's over here, the next day it's over there. And that really does, I think, impact things. I mean, people show up at the wrong polling place. Now, I was at the Dodge City thing, and that was an amazing, amazing example of democracy in action, because people came from all over the country to get those people to the polls. And it was just beautiful to watch. I mean, I think they had more people vote at the remote precinct than they had vote in the regular, in the regular elections before. So it was really exciting to see that, people cared that much, that they just descended on that people in the community, people from outside the community. It's like they had more people giving rides to voters than they had people to give rides to. I mean, it was great.
And certainly, I know, Tom, this passed both the House and the Senate with very little dissent.
Yeah, actually, I think the final vote was misleading in that it was a great bipartisan bill. And I think it passed by those big margins because it was, and our whole delegation came together and supported it. Tabitha Lehman did a great job pushing it, Aletha Faust-Godot in the Senate. There was this great effort. And because of that, I think the final vote was huge, but getting there wasn't so, because there was a lot of angst amongst a lot of other county clerks and election officials in other counties that didn't really want to do this. But the bill's permissive, and we make that really clear. And we have the technology in Sedgwick County. We want to do it here. Johnson County wants to do it. Eventually some of those other counties may, but I think it's a good thing. I have one precinct in my district where the last 5 elections they voted in a different polling place each time.
Oh, wow.
And so that just confuses voters, and it does hurt turnout. So I think this will be great. People can vote near where they work, where they shop. They can go to locations that aren't as busy. I mean, I think it's good. And we've done it for years, as Tabitha pointed out, with advanced voting. It's just that on election day, all of a sudden, you have to vote at your polling place. And I think it's a really good change for the people of Kansas.
Yeah.
I think it will increase voter turnout. It will make it easier for people to do it. We're fortunate in Sedgwick County to have Tabitha Lehman as our election commissioner and to have a county commission that supports her to the level that they've got the technology available. The big problem was when it was a mandate in the original bill, a lot of little counties are going like, we can't get this done because we don't have the money. So they changed the bill in committee or on the floor, I forget which, and made it an option. So counties can adopt that rule when they're ready. And I think that's probably the best choice to make because we have such a broad spectrum of size of counties. You know, you got 2,500 people in there, or like Ford County, you've only got one polling place anyway. So I think it's a great bill. I think it'll help with turnout.
Well, and I think too, you know, people aren't going to drive 30 miles from, you know, one little town to another little town to vote.
I can see them looking for lines outside of polling places trying to find one that's not busy. You know?
But it might not be necessary in you know, a low population county.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, but here, I mean,
But in the bigger,
it'll
the
be a lot,
more
it'll be a
populous
big help, I
counties,
think.
yeah, it will definitely make a difference. I can almost say I'll probably vote in a different location than I usually do. Although I got to say, in our family, it's kind of a tradition. We get up, we're there right when the door opens, first thing in the morning. We all go together. I don't know if I want to give that up yet or not.
Unless my polling place gets moved, because I live so close to mine. I can
You know,
walk
but
to it, so.
what it will do is it'll make the canvass much easier to do too,
Yeah.
because
Oh,
they
yeah.
won't have to worry about the provisionals.
Right.
So it'll make the
Cut way down
canvassing
on
that
those.
occurs after the official vote tally, it'll make that a lot easier.
Okay, well, this was one thing lawmakers have passed. One thing that hasn't happened is a bill that would change some things with DCF. At the same time that Wichita police are investigating the murder of a 3-year-old boy, state lawmakers are still working on a law to prevent similar tragedies, as Crystal Sherrill from KSN News explains.
House Bill 2392, also known as Adrians Law, originally would add people who live inside a home where a child is being abused to the list of mandated reporters. But that part has been taken out by lawmakers. Some fear it would be hard to prosecute some adults inside the home who could possibly be abuse victims themselves.
When the patterns progress, that the abuse and those situations like that become part of the norm, it's hard for them to differentiate that.
You know, what one family member may consider as abuse and another family member may not, and then trying to reintegrate families, which is the policy of the state of Kansas. If false allegations are made, or if allegations that are unfounded are made.
Another amendment to the bill would require social workers or other investigators to physically observe the alleged victim of abuse.
A lot of times we found out that DCF would go on both sides of the state line and would never see the children.
Records from the months leading up to Adrian's death show a social worker never visibly saw the child.
Don't take that, oh, they're with the grandma, they're with so-and-so, they're at school. They would have to go to the school, observe, or wait till the child comes home and set up a specific time to observe the child.
The same goes for 3-year-old Evan Brewer, whose body was found encased in cement in 2017. His family says one of his killers, his mother's boyfriend, refused to let DCF see Evan a short time before his death.
My concern are for the children. They're the helpless victims of these situations.
Now, one thing that the governor said at the beginning was that reforming DCF was one of her priorities. There is a bill that has gone into law that provides money for more social workers. Does that help with some of these situations?
I think it should. I think getting more social workers and better trained social workers, I mean, that bill has a lot of things in it that I think will help the system a lot. And I think Adrian's bill is a good bill as well, and hopefully at some point, if it doesn't pass this session, maybe next session.
Yeah, because it is a 2-year session.
Yeah.
And now, Phil, I know you're in family court.
Yeah.
Do you see the needs for some of these changes?
Well, that's usually like down in Minnesota and juvenile, but yes, I do. I see it every day. You know, this bill started out very differently. It's gut and go with what's left. And so, you know, they took out some really troublesome provisions that would have required prosecution of other adults in the house if they didn't report the abuse. You know, it's been blessed. I think that it's got a shot in the wrap-up session, and that means that it's gone to an exempt committee, and so even though it has not even been on the floor of the House yet, that it's got a possibility of being processed this session, or it's still alive for next year too.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good idea to have staff look at these kids just to see what everybody's telling them is the truth or not.
Well, one of the people who's making a lot of decisions in what they are talking about during that wrap-up session, Senator Susan Wagle, she's looking at a job outside of the State House. State Senator Susan Wagle, Senate President, spent part of this week in Washington, D.C., meeting with President Trump's political team and others as she explores a run for the U.S. Senate.
I'm Susan Wagle, President of the Kansas Senate.
As the Wichita Eagle reported this week, Susan Wagle is laying the groundwork for a 2020 run for the U.S. Senate. The paper points out how Wagle has increasingly aligned herself with the Trump administration and taken an opposition role at the Kansas State House, leading the charge against Democrat Governor Laura Kelly. Wagle told the Eagle Kansans, quote, want some problems fixed, and they want a strong pro-Trump conservative as the next U.S. Senator. Political scientist Bob Beatty with Washburn University told the Eagle a divided government in Topeka has helped Wagle raise her profile. Quote, she's in the news a lot, and she's been able to get attention for defending conservative issues, which is what she's really going to need in that primary, he said. Wagle has said a possible run for the U.S. Senate has not changed her role at the Kansas State House or her ideals. Now, of course, there are some who said, well, she went against Brownback to a certain extent during his years, and now she's swinging more to the right, becoming more conservative as she's looking at a run. What are you seeing? You worked with her under both, Tom. How are you seeing things in the State
I've
House?
worked with her a long time. She first got elected in 1990, so we served together for 8 years in the Kansas House. She was in the House first, and she was actually the first woman ever elected pro tem of the Kansas House, so she was Speaker pro tem there. She went over to the Senate and became the first woman ever elected president of the Senate. So, I mean, she has some major accomplishments.
Oh, yeah.
And I think over the year, if you look over her 30 years or so, she's been a pretty consistent
28.
conservative. Yeah,
28 years.
It's close to 30, yeah. But she's been a pretty consistent conservative over that period. You know, you can see ups and you can see changes, but part of that, there is a certain role that the legislative body has. It's a separate body of government, and there's a certain role, no matter who the governor is, of being skeptical and challenging what the governor says. So it makes sense that she would not always be with Brownback. It makes sense she would not be with Kelly. Having said that, I don't know if she is going to run for the Senate. I know a lot of people think she is. I think it's going to be a crowded field. A lot of people run. I think she'll be a formidable candidate if she does. But she's also she's got family issues with her daughter's health, and I don't know, but Susan is a very powerful person. On a personal level, we get on real well. We disagree on a number of issues. I wish she'd let the Medicaid expansion have a debate in the Senate, for instance. But I've worked with her for a long time, and she in the end, lots of times, a pretty pragmatic politician.
Yeah, I know certainly been much more available to the media, as Bob Beatty had pointed out this session.
Well, maybe that is a sign she's running.
Hey, Diane, I'm sure you've experienced some of the same things. Before we had to chase her down, and now she's calling us.
Well, I mean, when you're running for something, things change. But, I think she's probably got a pretty good chance. I mean, everybody's going to be in this race, and so if you can get that conservative bloc, or at least a big part of the conservative bloc, you got a good chance. I mean, I think Tom's going to run. I think Phil's going to run.
I'm not running. But if there were like 7 or 8 male candidates and she's the only female candidate too, I think that could help her as well.
Yeah.
Good, very well.
Every time I buy a lottery ticket, it determines whether I'm going to run for the Senate or not. The reality is that Susan is of two minds, like many. I mean, she wants to be a pro-Trump conservative, but she also wants to be pragmatic and run state government. And those two can be mutually exclusive things. We're going to have to see who all's going to run.
Yeah.
I think if Mike Pompeo announces, everything changes, and if Kathleen Sebelius runs, that everything changes. Is Kathleen going to run?
I don't know. You have to ask Kathleen.
Yeah, I know.
Right.
So, there are so
Derek
many
Schmidt
people
and,
looking at it.
Jeff Collier deserve a mention here, too.
Yeah, well, that's
Chris
true.
Kobach.
Okay, well, talking about running, I'm going to switch topics here a
Yeah.
little bit. Some people may find themselves running for baseball games
I know
because
it.
they may have to go a ways to get from their parking to the stadium. Now, in the run-up to a new baseball stadium in Wichita, parking has been a big worry for many. This week, the city sat down with parking officials to look at exactly what's needed. The average person is willing to walk about 1,600 feet from their parking space to an event. That's according to studies done by a consultant firm and Jeff Wolf, president of the Car Park Inc., who already operates the city's garages. Officials say right now there are more than 5,000 available parking spaces that distance from the ballpark site. Those spaces include public, commercial, and private lots, as well as street parking. Factors that could decrease the number of spaces available include spots taken by drivers for nearby businesses, events, and residential parking. Another option for fans would be shuttle services from downtown parking garages.
We have a baseball schedule out so far. We have a Century 2 schedule out so far. We usually know well in advance when a large event is occurring that we can do some planning and figure out, okay, when's this event going to be in, when's it going to be out, what do we need to do to move the pieces around to make it work.
Okay, so Phil, I know you've got some pretty strong opinions on this, so let us have it.
Well, obviously, none of the people in the study have bad knees or are over 45 or, 420 spots for an event that's 10,000 people. All you have to do is go to Interest and understand that they have no parking plan. And, I think the church at McLean and Douglas is going to have a great fundraising opportunity. Their numbers are based on like nobody living there parking in the street. That's not realistic. And so, I really think they need to address it in a more constructive way. But, and that would be really implementing something like the shuttle bus. What they're really doing is they're going to take McLean and they're going to build this beautiful shopping center. And they need the space for that. So they don't need any more parking spaces most of the time for the shopping center. So, they've got to implement a real shuttle bus system that somebody's going to pay for. We'll see who does.
Well, I know you've covered this a lot, Diane.
Oh yeah, and the thing that I see is there's a huge disconnect between the people who go to design charrettes and say that they want walkability and bikeability and they don't want all those cars all over the place, and the people who read my paper who are on a very different plane with this thing, saying basically, why would you create this massive attraction and make it hard to get to? It doesn't make sense to a lot of people. I get hundreds of comments. Every time I write one of these stories, I get hundreds of comments saying, what are these people doing? So it's gonna be, but then, you have this survey and it's like, well, everybody loves this, and it's like, it's not so much.
Yeah.
So it's gonna
Well, it seems like the city really has been, they've had some stumbles and they've really been trying to pump up. Yeah, we've been thinking about things. We know what we're doing, but still, as you've said, a lot of questions from the public on that.
Yeah, I mean, they don't like it.
Well, and that lot gets used for a lot of people that go to Century 2 will park in the baseball parking lot to walk or take a shuttle over there.
Well, so, I'm getting the signal that we are way out of time. Phil, Tom, Diane, thank you so much. I've enjoyed our conversation. I hope you've enjoyed our discussions today. We'd love to hear what you think. Drop us a line at kansasweek@kpts.org. For now, have a great week.